Robert, if you could just briefly introduce yourself to us and your role.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all, or good morning, wherever you might be. Names are Robert Ndugwa. I'm the current head for the Data and Analytics section here at UN Habitat. This is a specialized unit that deals with mostly compilation of data and evidence that is used to guide policy making in the urban sphere, but also at the same time monitoring a couple of global agendas, and that includes SDGs, the new urban agenda, amongst many other mandates that have been handed over to UN Habitat.
Many thanks, Robert, and also good afternoon to everyone, or good morning or good evening also from my side. It's really great to have you here. Many thanks for coming, and I'm really glad that we have this collaboration between the Institute for Global Sustainable Development and with your group and with UN Habitat since long time, and we share this interest, isn't it, in the urban sustainable urban development, and specifically thinking about the specific remit of UN Habitat around the SDG 11. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you think are the challenges and opportunities for research, especially for this interaction with research in terms of supporting progress towards the SDG 11.
Thanks a lot for that question. In terms of SDG 11, particularly speaking to the role for UN Habitat. UN Habitat is a lead custodian agency for 9 indicators that sit in the cluster of SDG 11. And there it means, carrying a responsibility of developing methodologies, building capacities of countries, working with a variety of stakeholders and partners, including, research teams, people from academia, civil society, but also city governments and national level government partners to, first of all, understand what the targets and indicators entail, and at the same time ensure that we build capacities at those local levels and empower them to monitor and report the progress that is being achieved at each of those targets and indicators. And within Goal 11, you will see that there's a range of issues that we really focus on, going from housing, where we cover slums, access to public transport, how our cities are growing, and how we ensure that citizens participate in urban development and urban design and management, the culture and heritage side, the climate change issues, the urban environment, particularly looking at the air quality or looking at waste management, public spaces, how to ensure we have the right urban and national urban policies or local urban policies, and at the same time also ensuring that we have the right legislation for climate change. And last but not least, the real focus on how we ensure that we use local materials in the construction of our urban formations. So all these aspects really require a lot of research. They require a lot of, background understanding in terms of cities building the right rationale, understanding why they need to invest in all these components, but more so, I think, understanding the interconnectivity between all these components. And we believe that it only takes, strong research teams, strong academic teams and institutes to help us understand how, for example, all housing is connected to transport, or how transport is connected to climate change issues, or how climate change is actually connected to a healthy urban environment. Looking today, where we are faced with a lot of the pandemic due to COVID, we've begun to see how many of these components have been tested. And you can see that a health or a public health issue in an urban area has drastically affected urban transport, and people are shunning away from these massive urban transport systems, choosing instead to go for bicycles or transport mechanism where they don't have to interact a lot with people. And these are the components that we've been pushing a lot, that the research side can actually help us understand better those specific components and challenges. But on the other hand, understanding the challenges and opportunities is one, but innovating how to overcome those very challenges, we tend to think that that science will come from research, it will come from urban laboratories that might be sitting somewhere, but at least understanding what the issues are and innovatively working through to give us the required solutions that might be low-cost solutions, easy to implement solutions, and one that local governments can take on board quite easily. So we do feel that there's a huge role for research, and a lot of that research remains a huge gap where we can, I think, partner and work with many of the teams such as yours.
Thanks, Robert. That's really great. Yeah, I think we share this interest on the complexity of the urban and how we actually tackle this. I was also thinking that especially in your team and in analytics in UN Habitat, and and this is also taken into the background of the word for this year's SDG anniversary, 50th anniversary, which is factivism. So there is a lot of emphasis on data at the moment, isn't it? So I was wondering, in terms of the data challenges and how data science, for example, could help, with this complexity, with these challenges that we just mentioned. What do you think will be the most kind of like important opportunities there in terms of data science?
I think in the whole SDG sphere, particularly under Goal 11 and perhaps also zeroing down to the issue of cities, we do believe that cities of the future will only be able to survive if they embrace evidence and data. And yet, a lot of the data today that is being collected on cities, much of it is actually not being analyzed. A lot of it is just passing and not being analyzed to the potential that is potentially available today to help us understand almost close to real time what are the issues that urban citizens are facing and how can we better those specific challenges or overcome the challenges that they are currently facing. So we do believe very strongly that, if you go piecemeal, sector by sector, starting off, for example, with transport, there is a huge role there for data science, for example, to help us understand time spent in transportation, be it through traffic jams. We need to understand how much of time is lost in just transport from point A to point B. But we're also interested in how much does it cost and how much would it cost to move from point A to B. But if we are to also improve the infrastructure, we're interested in knowing how much would it cost to improve the infrastructure we have today to ensure that challenges that are faced in that sector can actually be overcome. So in essence here, we see that if we can use data science to help us understand better the problems of today, particularly understanding them closer to real time, not waiting 5 years until the survey is conducted, for us to learn that it's costing perhaps $10 a day to move from A to B. And then we have to take another 3 years to plan how to overcome such a challenge before the infrastructure is actually improved and set up. So we do believe that data science here can help us narrow that gap of decision making through understanding better the challenges that we are facing today and how we can actually overcome them. At the same time, taking again the case of what COVID has taught us today. COVID has taught us today that the cities that have invested in innovations, cities that have invested in data science are actually 5 steps or 10 steps ahead of other cities in terms of planning better and planning for any future waves that might come through COVID. And that is why we do believe very strongly that cities that invested, for example, in innovative mechanisms like the urban observatories, which we've been preaching about, were much more positioned to understand who was more vulnerable, who was being left behind previously, and by targeting those who are more vulnerable, they were able to overcome the COVID situation much better, or they were able to plan for it much better, compared to cities that didn't have the data. So basically, COVID showed up on their doorsteps, and they started to look for data. How many people do we have in this city? How many are living in slums? How many are lacking housing today? How many don't have access to public transport? How many medical facilities do we have in this city? So all that information had to be collected during a pandemic, compared to having collected and invested in data systems that would have allowed them to have that data and plan with it. So we do believe very strongly that the future of data science here is actually to accelerate the time period between data collection, data processing, and interpretation of that messaging from the data, so that it shows up on the table of a policymaker tomorrow, and they're able to make a decision that is useful for today, but not using the data of 2 years ago to make a decision of today.
That's really interesting, Robert. Thanks. And I think this emphasis you gave on the capacity, on the importance of data capturing also this reality of COVID, and how actually this can make a practical difference now in responding to the pandemic, but also in the need of data to capture perhaps the different groups of the society. And then again, like, I think, that's really important in order to be representative, is that data is also able to represent the inequalities we have in cities, and then actually help us to tackle these inequalities and make progress for everyone, isn't it? So I think I was really interested in this example you gave, and especially thinking about, the role of data now for transforming and doing, our recovery from this pandemic a real transformative process. I think that's really interesting to hear. And I was wondering then, based on that, what are the topics you and your team in the UN Habitat are currently working on, and what is on the radar for the next steps?
Indeed, there are a couple of issues that we're working on currently, but it goes without saying that the piece and the center of all this work now sits squarely on what COVID has taught us during this pandemic. And that's the whole idea of making our cities smarter and injecting in a lot of innovations in our processes. And on the data side, that translates into putting data and evidence at the center of all the planning processes, all the designing processes, but also how to inform the building back better angle of cities that will be able to survive future pandemics like these. So currently, we've been trying to answer one question, collecting massive data sets from all spheres of urban areas, but to help us understand the nature and movements of pandemics. And one of the anchor for this sort of work has been this idea that when we looked at the pattern of the spread of COVID, we realized that literally most of the cases in many countries, almost 90% of cases, first showed up in a city. And it's in the cities that these cases actually multiplied and spread out to other parts of the countries. And what it has taught us in this process then is that cities as a center or places where a virus or a pandemic can easily breed need to have the right data and the right evidence. So we've been working on first collecting data to help us understand where the first case showed up, how it spread, and where it spread, and the mechanism of that sort of spread. And this data has somehow, given us the angle that any future pandemic will probably survive better in an urban area. And if we don't redesign and build better our cities, be it the redesigning of transport systems or redesigning our housing systems, but also from the softer part of the social aspects, understand who in our societies are actually being left behind. As you might be aware, when COVID comes to a slum, it spreads almost 10 times as faster as in a non-slum area. And that is all evidence to show us that housing and the design of our cities also has a contribution to all these components. So we've been mostly collecting the evidence that will help us to inform the processes of building back better for any future pandemics, but also at the same time inform the future waves or second or third waves of COVID-19, so that cities can actually plan better in terms of where to locate hospitals, how to reconstruct schools, where to construct schools, to ensure that life can actually revert to normal and be able to live with the pandemic without necessarily affecting the entire economies and killing off all the livelihoods that people have worked for the last 20 or 50 so years.
Many thanks, Robert. Yes, indeed. I think we have a lot to do together, and I think this collaboration between researchers and the practical agenda and your team and UN Habitat and actors who are really very leading on the sustainable development agenda is really important, I think, and important that we draw these bridges between research and practice, really. So in that sense, many thanks for the interview. Many thanks for your thoughts on this, and I look forward to continue to collaborate and also drawing together our research community to tackle these challenges together.
Thanks a lot too, and I really appreciate the wonderful collaboration we've had all these years. I'm definitely looking forward to working with you once everything returns to normal.
Many thanks, Robert.
Thank you.